happy and ready for a good speaker. I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Loren Spivack. Loren, come on out. The free market warrior.
Well, it's great to be here, guys. My name is Loren Spivack, and I go by the nickname the Free Market Warrior because I travel all over the United States, from Maine to San Diego, and I talk with conservative groups, Tea Party groups, Republican groups about free market economics. It is my contention that most of the problems that our country faces today stem from our utter failure to understand the most basic principles of economics. Somehow, we became the wealthiest country in the history of the world about 100 years ago. And something did that. And now we're well on our way to becoming the poorest country in the history of the world, certainly if you measure it in terms of indebtedness. And I think that it's simply because we've forgotten the basic logic of economics that led us to be successful in the first place. And so a number of years ago, I developed a seminar which I call Economic Literacy. And it's a 2-night, 7-hour seminar designed for conservatives who want to have a better grasp on the fundamentals of how a free market economy works, what a free market economy does, and the conditions under which a free market economy thrives and brings prosperity to everybody. So it's a 2-night seminar. I've delivered it now almost 300 times. In 24 states. I'm going to be doing it again next week on the 24th and the 25th. Was it Monday and Tuesday? I think? Monday and 24th and the 25th. It's 2 nights. It's 7 hours. Okay? 6 to 9:30 in Placerville. Okay, you'll tell them the address? It's on the sheet. If you look at the agenda, you got the sheet, okay? So it's 40 minutes from here, and it's free. You're welcome to come. And what I'm also going to propose this evening is if you'd like me to come back to Vacaville and do the seminar for you guys right here for free. I don't even charge. It's the one piece of economics everybody gets, right off the bat, okay? I don't charge for it. I'm going to be back in California in March. And if you don't make it to Placerville, or even if you do, if you'd like me to come back and do it for your group, it's 2 nights. You'll like it. It's fun. There is no math, zero math, no minimal jargon. Economics is a human science. It's about how human beings coordinate together and naturally make ourselves more prosperous if we just are allowed to do that. Okay? So it's fascinating, not dull, and I would love to come back and do it for you guys too. What I was going to do tonight is just talk about a little corner of economics, a little piece of economics for a limited time span this evening. I was going to talk about money. Money is something that everybody thinks about and everybody cares about. A lot of people misunderstand money. There's a mistake that's often made when we talk about money. I'm going to ask you to do me a huge favor. Could you just bring me the glass? I left it just too many feet away to grab with my own hand. Thank you so much. Money frequently is confused with wealth. They seem to be the same thing. It's like wealth and money are the same thing. I know a wealthy guy. How do I know he's wealthy? He's got a big pile of money. You see, money is wealth and wealth is money. But it's not true. It is an error. It is a freshman economics student's mistake. Money and wealth are not the same thing. Money, in fact, is a tool that measures wealth. That's the difference. Money is a tool that measures wealth. It's not wealth. It's kind of like a clock is a tool that measures time. But a clock is not the same thing as time. Is it? Is a clock time? No, a clock's a tool that measures time. If I bend back the arm of the clock, do I give myself more time? I break the clock. If I leave the clock alone, it measures time. If I mess with it, it doesn't do anything at all. And that's kind of where we are with money. Now, why is this relevant? Well, for the last 80 years or so, the official economic policy of the United States government has been based on the writings of an economic quack named John Maynard Keynes, who back in the 30s suggested that you could fix a broken economy. How? By spending money. If the government takes a big bucket of money and dumps it into the economy, then everything will start perking up again and everything will be fine. Do you understand how he's making that freshman mistake? He's confusing money with wealth. And that's what I want to talk about this evening. My first question when I was confronted with Keynes's theory that the government can fix the economy was, where does the government get the money from? If it's going to dump the money in the economy, where's it coming from? And of course, government only gets money three ways. They can tax it, they can borrow it, or they can print it. Let's take a look at these. Let's start with taxing. If the government taxes your money away from you and then gives it back to you, are you stimulated? We could have just left you alone. What was that all about? And in fairness, that's not what Keynes recommends. Keynes does not say to tax more. He actually says tax less. His followers have forgotten this part. The Keynesians of today seem to have missed that chapter, and they rarely talk about cutting taxes, but that's what Keynes says. He says cut taxes and increase spending. Less taxes and more spending, he says, because the secret to prosperity, the secret to a healthy, vibrant, growing economy is debt, is deficits. That you borrow the money and that's what's going to fix the economy, because that's what he says. His theory is that you're fixing the economy with borrowed money, so you're not taking the money out, you're only putting it in. Because you borrowed it, you're not taxing. And so that will expand the economy. That's his theory. And of course, my question is, where do you borrow the money from? The planet Neptune? You're borrowing it from the economy. You are taking it out. You're just taking it out of the credit markets instead of out of the tax rolls. It's like taking water out of one side of a pond instead of the other side of a pond. It doesn't matter. The fact is that every dollar borrowed in the world must be lent. Must it not? Every dollar borrowed must be lent. Every dollar lent must be borrowed. If we added up the total dollars borrowed on earth and the total dollars lent on earth, would they not be exactly the same to the penny? Okay? And if the government borrows the money, there's obviously less money for everybody else to borrow, because the only reason we have borrowing and lending, you know why we have borrowing and lending in the world? It's very simple. There are some people in the world who have more money than they want to spend right now. And there's other people who want to spend money right now they don't have. So you know what happens? The people who want to spend money they don't have go to the people who have money they don't want to spend, and they borrow it. Usually there's a bank in between, but the bank's just a broker. The bank's a middleman. The guy who wants to spend money he doesn't have borrows it from the guy who has money he doesn't want to spend every single time. And if the government borrows it, there's less money to borrow to start a business, to build a house, a factory, whatever it is you want to do. You are taking it out of the economy. But Keynes disagrees with me. He says, no, it'll stimulate the economy. So the third thing is you can print the money. And Keynes likes that too. He says borrowing is good and printing is good. They're both good because they both give the government money that it can dump into the economy. The problem, of course, with printing is you debase the value of the money. If you print more money, the money is going to be worth less. How can it be otherwise? Is there anything in the world that you make more of and not reduce its value? I can't think of a single thing. Everything, as the supply goes up, the value goes down. If the government prints more money, the value of the money you've already got is going to go down, necessarily. And if not, if you can produce more money without reducing the value of the old money, why do we send counterfeiters to prison? We ought to give them a medal for stimulating the economy, don't you think? You know, it's good when the Fed does it. Why is it bad when he's taking initiative, this private counterfeiter? You may recall, I'm thinking it was a year ago now, the government of Cyprus announced that they were going to confiscate 10% of everyone's bank account in Cyprus. Remember this news story? It was like a big news story for a week. And I remember it really well because for a month straight afterwards, every talk I gave everywhere, I was asked the same question first. We'd get to the question time, and the first question was, will the U.S. government do that to me? Is the U.S. government going to come and confiscate 10% of my bank account? That's what everybody wanted to know. And it's a great question. And I have the answer for you. No. The U.S. government will not be confiscating 10% of your bank account. I promise. I guarantee it. For a very simple reason. They don't have to. They've got a much easier way to achieve the same effect. They can print their own money, okay? And by printing as much as they want, and by printing money, they devalue your money. They don't have to take your money out of your bank account because they can take the value out of the money. Okay? I'll put this in simple human terms. If you had a printing press in your basement where you could print your own money, would you rob a bank? That would be crazy. Robbing a bank is dangerous. You could get shot. You could get arrested. All kinds of bad things could happen to you. Why would you rob a bank if you could print your own money? Well, that's how the U.S. government feels. Why go to the trouble of all the political pain and anger of confiscating people's money when you could just print your own limitlessly, and you are taking their money, their wealth away? You're just not taking their money away. Right? Wealth and money are different things. So when I do my seminar, I didn't bring it with me tonight, but when I do my seminar, I usually bring with me one of my prized possessions. And I have a $100 trillion bill. And it's real. It's not fake. It's not a toy. It's not a game. It's a genuine $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe, where 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars will buy you a can of Pepsi. That's what you feed into the soda machine to get your soda. 100 trillion with a T dollars. And people are like, well, that's crazy. Who came up with that? 100 trillion to a Pepsi. Well, nobody came up with it. It was a natural result of government policy. The government of Zimbabwe would run out of money, and so what would they? They'd print more. And they made some important discoveries in Zimbabwe. We call this the Zimbabwe School of Economics. They discovered that it costs no more to print a $100 trillion bill than it costs to print a $1 bill. Did you know that? The zeros are free. The printers just throw those in for free. So the government of Zimbabwe would just call up the print shop and say, look, I need another truckload of money, only this time I need you to throw 3 or 4 more zeros on the end of everything and just ship it on down here because we're plumb out of money. And if you do that for a few years, you end up with $100 trillion to a Pepsi. Okay? I don't know if any of you have saved up $100 trillion yet, but if you did and you went to withdraw it and you found out it was enough to buy a Pepsi, I think you'd feel like you'd been robbed. And the bank would say, what are you talking about? It's all there. You count it again. Every penny is, and it is, but the value is gone. That's what you get when you print more money, and which is what we're doing now. By the way, if you're worried that we're borrowing our deficit from China, you're years out of date. We haven't borrowed a penny from China for years and years. We're printing it all The entire deficit is being printed right now. It was last year, it was the year before that, it was the year before that. Okay? You know how much more sophisticated we are than Zimbabwe? I'll tell you how we do this. We've got a building in Washington called the Treasury. You can go down to Washington, you can see the Treasury building. What happens inside? It's a misnomer, by the way. There's no treasure. It actually probably should be called the debtory. And inside, it's a huge printing press. And you know what they do? They print government bonds. That's what the Treasury does for a living. They print U.S. government bonds. And then a few blocks away, there's another building called the Federal Reserve. Do you know what happens in there? They print money. Now, here's the key question. What does the Federal Reserve do with the money it prints? It buys the bonds. So the money goes from the Fed to the Treasury, and the bonds go from the Treasury to the Fed. So you can see how much more sophisticated we are than Zimbabwe. We've got 2 whole buildings in Washington throwing pieces of paper they just printed at each other, and that's how we pay for our country. But Keynes likes this too. He says, oh no, that's good too. Print money and borrow money, and that's how we're going to save our economy. Let's go a little deeper into this. I want you to understand, it's called Keynesian economics. I want you to understand, not because it's right. It's dead wrong. It's as wrong as anything ever. You need to understand it, however, because our country is being run on this. I count 14 presidents from Herbert Hoover to Barack Obama. How many of those 14 do you suppose were Keynesians? In that they believed this concept that government spending would stimulate the economy. I count 13 out of 14. We've had one non-Keynesian president in the last 80 years. Okay? So here's how the belief system works. Keynes says like this, he says, what causes a recession, he says, is that there's too much supply and not enough demand. He says that's the problem. You've got too much stuff and not enough demand for the stuff. So what happens? Well, Keynes says the factories lay off workers. They don't need workers. There's too much stuff. Why would I pay you to make more stuff if the stuff I've already made isn't selling because there's too much supply and not enough demand? So the workers go home. And now the workers don't have a job. They don't have paychecks. So they're not buying anything. And demand falls further. And you've got a bigger gap. And Keynes says, look at that. You're in a trap. Okay? How do you get out of that trap? Now, you might think, well, if the workers went back to their old jobs at the factory and they started making stuff and earning stuff, the wheels would start turning and this would all start moving along. But Keynes says no. He says, no, that won't do it. That won't work. He says, sure, if the workers got their old jobs back, demand would go up. But supply would go up too. He says if supply and demand are out of whack, if you raise them both, they're still out of whack. No, says Keynes. We have to find these workers jobs where they'll get a paycheck, they'll earn money, they'll buy stuff and increase demand, but where they produce nothing. So they don't increase supply. That's what he says. And I was like, where do you find a job like that? Who is going to pay you money to produce nothing? And I can see that some of you have read Keynes's book, because that's exactly what he says. He says, the government, that's the answer. The government will hire them to produce nothing, and that'll fix the economy, because we'll have more demand and no supply. Okay, 13 out of 14 presidents have believed this, all right? It was Richard Nixon, a Republican, I have to note, who said, I quote, we're all Keynesians now. That's a famous Nixon quote. We're all Keynesians. This isn't even controversial anymore. Okay? Now, understand, my friends, that efficiency has nothing to do with this. The whole point is that you're paying them to produce nothing. How do you produce nothing efficiently? I mean, it's a contradiction in terms. So if the government hires them to dig a hole in the ground and then fill the hole back in with the same dirt, Perfect, says Keynes. It's a perfect job. They're doing absolutely nothing. They're getting paid for it, and that'll stimulate the economy. That's the road to prosperity. Just to make sure we're keeping up here on the same page. What does Keynes says? He says deficits are good. Waste is good. It leads to prosperity. What else does Keynes say is good? Destruction. Because if you have too much supply and not enough demand, if you destroy your supply, then you don't have it anymore, and you increase demand because you don't have the stuff anymore. Now you got more demand. So perhaps you guys were taught in school, as I was, that World War II stimulated the economy, right? Because of all that destruction. You destroy stuff, and then you have to hire people to replace it, and that stimulates the economy. Really? I was thinking, if that's the secret to prosperity, why doesn't Obama just call out the Air Force and carpet bomb San Francisco, for instance, okay? Now, nobody has to get hurt. See, we evacuate all the people. They could come here and live with you guys. You could put them up for a few weeks, okay? And then we have the Air Force level San Francisco, turn it into a pile of rubble, and then every unemployed person in America could be hired to rebuild San Francisco. Do you understand how great this would be for our economy? Unemployment would go to zero because everybody would be hard at work rebuilding San Francisco. And the only problem is that after a certain number of years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, at a certain point they would be done, right? It would be completely rebuilt. It would be exactly the way it was before. Every building had been rebuilt, and then you'd have to lay off all the workers because the job is over. But you know what the solution is then? You bomb it again. Okay? You can keep bombing and building and bombing and building, and we would have 100% employment forever. Except for one more problem. This is insane. Okay? This is utter insanity. I want to welcome you to the world of mainstream economics. This is the mainstream accepted school of economics in America today. There are 1,600 colleges and universities in the United States. How many of them do you think teach this stuff in their economics department? Not as a theory. Not as a possibility. They teach it as the absolute final answer. This is the God-given truth. This is just like global warming, okay? This is just settled science. Waste, destruction, and debt are the road to prosperity. This is why I do my seminar. We are never going to turn this country in the right direction as long as we've got a bunch of quack doctors trying to cure us. Okay? This is exactly the opposite. Now, there's many ways to disprove Keynes's theories. Some of them were developed long before Keynes came along. In the seminar, I talk about Jean-Baptiste Say, who was an early 19th century French economist who dealt with the same issues Keynes does. He went over the same territory, talks about the same points, and proves them all wrong. That he doesn't mention Keynes by name because Keynes hadn't been born yet. Okay, it's 100 years before he came along. He had already been proven wrong. Does that bother Keynes? Not at all. He just ignores it. And he comes up with a theory that's already been proven wrong, and everyone's like, oh, that's it. That's the solution to our problems. One of my favorite didactic techniques, however, if you want to understand economics, is the desert island technique. Something about desert islands. The air is so fresh and the ocean breeze and the sunshine. You go to a desert island, it clears your head. And complex economic ideas suddenly are easy to understand. So I want you all to join me on an imaginary trip to a desert island. Let's pretend that everyone in the room, just look around you, let's pretend we all are on a ship. And we go out sailing and we get shipwrecked on a desert island like Robinson Crusoe. I was speaking to another group and they wanted it to be Gilligan's Island, so I'm going to leave this up to you, whichever one you prefer. Okay, we're shipwrecked like Robinson Crusoe, and we've got no radio. No one knows we're here. We could be stuck on this island for all you know for the rest of our lives. Just imagine this for a second, okay? For all you know, this could be it. We're never going to get off. Would it not be immediately obvious to every single one of us that the way to survive, the way to achieve the highest possible standard of living under these trying circumstances would be for every one of us to produce? Would that just be obvious? I mean, we wouldn't even need to say it. It's just obvious. We all better get to work and produce. We would probably have a division of labor. It's another fundamental economic concept, and it's very simple. Some people are better at some things, and other people are better at other things. We'd figure out who was good at what, and we'd have a division of labor. We'd probably send some people into the woods to hunt animals that we could eat, right? We'd have people catching fish, people picking berries, people mending clothes, people building huts. We'd figure out what needed to be done and who did it best, and we'd probably exchange things with each other, don't you think? If I caught a fish and you picked some berries, we could trade off and we'd each have a more balanced meal. Now let's imagine that I was there with you and I said, well, I'm a Keynesian, so I'm not going to produce anything. But by consuming, I'm going to stimulate you to produce more. What do you think? Okay, so I'm going to lie on the beach all day and get a suntan. But when dinner comes, I'm eating a double portion of dinner. I'm eating twice as much dinner as having contributed nothing at all to it. I'm going to eat twice as much as everyone else. That's really going to rev up our economy. What, are you persuaded? Let's imagine that you built a hut to shelter yourself from the rain so you could sleep at night and not be exposed to the elements. And let's say I came along and I burned your hut to the ground. And I said, see, I've stimulated you. Now you can build it again. You thought you were going to be unemployed tomorrow, but I got you a job rebuilding the hut I burned down. You're welcome. I think I'm going to find myself floating out to sea, strapped to a coconut, okay? I don't think anybody wants me on their island, but I want you to understand that Keynes, or for that matter, Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi, would look at this and say, no, he's the secret to your whole economy. It's his consuming that's driving your economy. Look at how much he eats, okay? This is exactly what we're dealing with in America today. What made us the richest country in the history of the world? We produced stuff. We produce stuff really, really efficiently. We produce more than anyone's ever produced before. What's making us the poorest country in the history of the world? We've utterly forgotten this. We have millions of Americans on welfare producing nothing. Okay, and understand, the problem is not that the welfare per se, the problem is that they're producing nothing. You know there's people on welfare who cheat, right? They secretly have a job, off the books, and they get the welfare anyhow. What I want you to understand is they're the good guys. The ones who are cheating are the good guys because they're producing. Yeah, they're stealing some money, but at least they're being productive. It's the ones who are honestly getting the welfare, that's the problem. The ones who really are sitting on the couch all day doing absolutely nothing. They're the ones who are really making us poorer. Okay? We've got millions on unemployment insurance, people who've been unemployed for years. Why do we have unemployment insurance? Was it because we felt compassion for poor, unemployed people and wanted to give them a helping hand? No. Unemployment insurance was invented by John Maynard Keynes with the express purpose of getting people to consume when they're not producing. Because he said that would be counter-cyclical to the recession and stimulate the economy. Do you remember when Nancy Pelosi said the best way to fix the economy is more unemployment insurance? Do you remember when she said that? Everyone was like, that's crazy, where did they come from? She got that from Keynes's book. This was not her idea. That's right out of the textbook. That because they think that spending money is the secret to prosperity, when in fact, producing stuff is the secret to prosperity. If you bake a cake, you've made the economy bigger by one cake. If you eat a cake, you've made the economy smaller by one cake. You can't get more straightforward than this. And I'm not saying you shouldn't eat the cake. Just don't eat a cake and tell me you're improving the economy. You're not. The guy who baked the cake is adding to the economy. You're just consuming. Okay? So we've got millions in government jobs. About 20 million Americans work for government at all levels. And some of them, I'll be clear here, I'm not against all government. Some of them are doing things that clearly are legitimate, important jobs of government. We need courts, we need police, we need the military to defend the country. I have no problem with that. That's legitimate and it belongs to government. Others are doing legitimate jobs, but far less efficiently than they would be if they were employed in the private sector. Teachers come to mind. I don't doubt that teachers are teaching. But all the evidence, and this is very, very easy to demonstrate, is that the teachers would be hugely more efficient if teaching were handled in the private free market economy as opposed to as a function of government. Okay, so that's kind of a middle category. And then you've got millions more who are doing jobs that don't need to be done at all. They aren't jobs. I don't care how much you get paid. There's 9,000 people who work for the Department of Energy. What do they produce? Energy? They are negative producers. We have less energy because we have a Department of Energy. You understand? They're making us all poorer. If they'd go on strike for a couple years, we'd get richer at the Department of Energy. They are not jobs. They're anti-jobs. You need to come up with a word for this. If a job, if you work at Burger King for minimum wage, you are making the economy bigger. Maybe just a little bit, but you're making it bigger. The guy who works for the Department of Energy is making the economy smaller. He's making his fellow American poorer by going to work. It's an anti-job, even though he gets paid way more than the guy at Burger King. Interesting. Okay, we've got millions of college students staying in college into their 30s, getting graduate degrees in subjects like gay and lesbian studies, gender studies, African American studies, women's studies, Hispanic studies. And I want to be very clear here. My point is not that I have a problem with gay people or black people or Hispanic people. Not at all. I don't have a problem with anybody. These aren't subjects. Okay? The whole point of going to college is to learn special skills that relate to being a productive member of the economy. If you go to college and you learn how to be a heart surgeon, you have learned some valuable skills that are valuable to your economy and to your fellow citizen. Having spent $200,000 and who knows how many years getting your degree in gay and lesbian studies, what are you now qualified to produce? Nothing. These aren't subjects. This is left-wing agit-prop identity politics. This is a problem also. The only reason it happens is the government subsidizes it. Someone who is actually looking at going to college as an investment in its future would pick an actual subject that there's an actual market for. But government, of course, distorts that. Anyhow, so there's my overview of just one concept in economics, how our misunderstanding of money has led to so many problems. As I said, if you like, you can come to Placerville, or we invite me back here in March, and we can get into more detail on this. I was going to take another minute and show you my books. Because years ago, people were telling me, you ought to write a book. And I did, and it was almost immediately I got the feeling I had written the wrong book, because everybody thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics. But I had an epiphany, which is that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. You could put that in your coffee table, the dust will get 3 inches thick, no one will ever touch it. But if you write something that's fun and funny and accessible and entertaining, you reach millions of people who will never read the economics book. And so my first book was based on an observation I had that our president, Barack Obama, was very much like the Cat in the Hat. Has everyone read The Cat in the Hat? Okay, you remember the Cat in the Hat? So Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American house. And what does he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. Yeah? He wrecks everything he touches. And I was like, well, that's kind of like Obama. But what's fascinating is that the cat never gets it. To the last page of the book, the cat never loses his absurd self-confidence. He's utterly convinced that everything he does must be a good idea. And I was like, that's Obama. That's exactly his personality. Could you imagine the man ever coming to think that he's the problem? It would never cross his mind in 100 million years. And then he's got these two little friends, Thing 1 and Thing 2, who wreck the house even worse than he does. You remember? So they became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first history of the Obama administration. Or else maybe it's the first one in rhyme. I'm not sure, but it's the whole history of Obama. Oh, and remember the fish? The fish is the one warning everyone about the cat. The fish became Glenn Beck because I thought he was kind of the model of warning people about the cat. So this goes through bailouts and stimuluses and birth certificates and Fast and Furious and Benghazi, like everything you remember from 5 fun-filled Obama years, all done exactly parallel to The Cat in the Hat. I got my first book review last fall. Salon.com said that this book was the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. I was a happy man that day. That's on the cover now. So I was inspired to write my second book. Who has read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? Okay, not quite as famous, but it's another big Dr. Seuss book. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist. He was a member of the Socialist Party. He was an absolute left-winger on every issue, and he fills his books with little left-wing stories for your kids. And The Lorax was his journey into environmental wackoism. Okay, he hits these different left-wing topics, and The Lorax is about the environment. It's about an evil capitalist, what other kind is there, called the Onceler, who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we learn that that's bad, bad, bad. You know what he does? He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out. They become extinct. It was a movie that last year. They had a Lorax movie in the theater. Okay, he makes the trees extinct, and then he goes out of business because there's no more trees, so he closes up his factory and leaves. And I was reading this to my kids. I was like, does that make sense to you? Do capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Put it this way, who here worries that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chicken to extinction? Do you stay up at night worried about that Colonel Sanders is going to wipe out every last chicken and then they're going to be extinct and he's going to go out of business? You know what I think? I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than pretty much anybody else on Earth. I think he cares more than the chickens do. I think there will always be chickens as long as Colonel Sanders is there because his whole business model is based on producing more of them. And I will tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. Do you know why? Because we like to eat them. That's why. You could say the same thing for cows and sheep and wheat and corn while you're at it. The greatest thing that ever happened to a species is that human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery, okay? It is amazing how much good this brings to you, okay? We clear millions of acres just for you. We keep you warm in the winter. We feed you. We keep the predators away. If you get sick, we call in doctors for you. What other species gets treated like this? Now, in the end, we're going to kill you and eat you. But I got a news flash. That was happening anyhow. What do you think happens in the wild? Imagine you're a chicken in the wild. How do you think your life is going to end? You're going to move to Miami, and buy a condo, okay? You're getting killed and eaten, and far more unpleasantly in the wild than on old McDonald's farm. So The Lorax seemed like a book that desperately needed to be parodied. Mine is called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the crazy environmentalist. And it's the story about how America used to be free and prosperous. And we were prosperous because we were free. And then the environmentalists show up and come up with regulation after regulation after regulation, and they shut everything down. The factories close, everyone gets unemployed. Originally, I was going to call my book The State of California. So by the end of my book, everybody's unemployed. There's no more factories, no more jobs, no more nothing, except the Fed keeps printing money. And I'm going to read you the very end of this because it's just kind of a nice way to end, although I have one more thing I need to do. But here's how it ends after all of that. He says, "So I took a few stones from my factory lot, and I spelled out a word that's worth more than I've got, a word that means everything to one who has lost, because freedom is worth it, whatever the cost. And now that you're here, it's all plain to see that freedom itself just isn't free unless people like you are willing to fight to bring back our freedoms. It'll never be right. So catch," calls the 1%ler. He let something fall. It's the Constitution, the last copy of all. You're in charge of our heritage. Don't let us down. Teach your friends and your children. Spread it around. Stand up for your freedom against socialist schemers, environmentalist wackos, and utopian dreamers. Don't let crackpot economists and left-wing politicians get in the way of your most vital mission. If we can pry our country from these political hacks, maybe our prosperity and all will come back. So that's my second book. Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, I've never been to Zimbabwe, but that's also what happens. People ask me all the time, what's going to be the United States going to be like when the currency collapses? Another country that's been in the news on this exact same point is Venezuela, where their economy is a disaster area and the currency collapsed. I was reading an article just this last week that the only people who have real money, because the Venezuelan money is pretty much worthless. If you have a job in Venezuela, like a normal job working somewhere, you're getting paid in a paycheck that's worthless. You can't buy anything with that money. The money in your bank doesn't buy anything. Do you know who has money in Venezuela? The prostitutes. Because the prostitutes cater to foreign tourists and sailors who stop in Venezuela, and they charge and get, because they're foreigners, hard currency. Okay, that's where all the money is. Yeah, stop that. But this is the kind of craziness you have when you get into a situation like this. That if you're a hardworking person with a normal job, your money is worthless, but the prostitutes are one source of money. It's apparently illegal in Venezuela to trade currency between individuals, but prostitution is legal. So anyhow, there we go. So they become the prostitutes are now the banks at the same time. It's funny, but it's also really sad, and the thought that we're heading the same way is really sad. Are we good? Friend me and like me on the 2 pages. If you'd like to see the book, they're right over here. And invite me back in March. We'll do the whole seminar. You'll have a blast. Thank you.
Video services provided by Vacaville's very own Choker Films. Video production, editing, and compositing services.